You know what, folks? The libs, the college kids, the crazy commies, all these people who I normally, would be on the opposite side of every issue with, they may just cost Joe Biden the election. The amount of energy that exists in this country right now amongst young left-wing voters against would-be Democrat voters, the extent to which they are energized against Joe Biden is astounding. Biden has pretty much, in the eyes of these people, in the eyes of the American left, Biden is a compatriot. He is most certainly an ally. He is almost inextricably linked to Benjamin Netanyahu. Biden is calling this student movement anti-Semitic, basically saying that he does not want these people's votes. And the Israelis, led by Netanyahu, are absolutely outraged, and they want American authorities to crack down on these people, to start making more arrests, to stop all of this speech. And as I said before, you know what? These college kids, they're not my type of people. I don't generally like them. I wouldn't invite them into my home for the most part. But you can't deny that they are effective. They're getting attention. They're creating chaos. And they are jeopardizing Joe Biden's re-election campaign. Because I will argue the more people on the left are energized and informed about the war in Gaza, this is unequivocally negative for Joe Biden. This is an issue that he wants to be not the focal point of anyone's decision on how they vote in 2024, not because the anti-Israel vote is going to go to Trump or something like that, but because the anti-Israel vote will simply sit out the election. After all, Biden is never going to be able to out-Zionist Donald Trump. Wasn't it Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who literally shared his bed with Netanyahu when he was a kid? Like, I think Netanyahu came to stay at Jared Kushner's house, because Jared Kushner comes from a very prominent family. And I think Netanyahu stayed at their house, and he slept in Jared's bed, and young Jared, had to go sleep out on the couch in the living room. And so he quite literally, now I might be confusing him with Ben Shapiro, because I know this story is true about someone, but it might be, who's a very prominent Zionist in America. It might be Ben Shapiro, but I'm 99% sure that this is Jared Kushner, because I don't think that Shapiro's family was that well connected to Netanyahu. Although, wait, wasn't it Shapiro? Now that I'm getting into all of these deep Zionist ties, I think it was Shapiro who, when he was a kid, played the theme from Schindler's List on violin for Netanyahu at some kind of event. Anyway, none of this really matters. The point is, you're never going to out-Zionist Donald Trump if you're Joe Biden, so he's not going to beat Trump on the issue of being pro-Israel. But at the same time, Biden, if he is too pro-Israel, he's going to completely alienate the anti-Israel vote. And then, of course, Biden knows that if he is overtly anti-Israel, he's going to lose, again, a huge part of the Democratic voter base, because Americans in general are pretty pro-Israel. And Jewish Americans in general are very, very pro-Democrat in how they vote. They vote heavily Democrat. They also tend to live in cities. densely populated cities, which are very deep blue. And while that might not matter, if you lose a few Jewish voters in a mayoral election when it's an 85% Democrat city, it could matter in a statewide election, like when you're voting for president. So, for example, if Biden were to try and appease the college students and say, okay, I respect your right to protest, and I hear what you're saying, even if we disagree, and try and meet them in the middle, make some sort of diplomatic overtures towards this student movement. He would end up alienating large swaths of not just Jewish voters, but I would think also Catholics and wealthy Democrats in general. It's not like Democrats are, Democrat voters are particularly anti-Israel. It is a minority within the Democratic Party. A lot of them might not be that passionate one way or the other, but there still are a lot of Democrats and people on the, on the American left who are, maybe recognize, some of the faults of Israel, but are still very much pro-Israel. And so even if he's able to placate these college students somewhat to where they will reluctantly vote for Joe Biden, he could end up turning off enough pro-Zionist voters, let's say in Philadelphia, in order to flip Pennsylvania to Trump in the case of a close election. Now, I'm not saying that the war in Gaza is going to cost Biden the election, but it could end up being a significant contributing factor. No one issue wins or loses really any election. There's a lot that goes into these things, and voters across the spectrum have different priorities. There's always a number one priority, but if you ever look at whatever the number one priority is of voters, it's still a fairly small percentage of people. It's not like, in 2016, 70% of voters said that the border was their number one priority in the election. And likewise, there is not a huge percentage of people one way or the other whose number one issue when they go to vote for President of the United States is that president's policy with respect to Israel. But here's what I'll tell you. The more present the issue of Israel is in the news, the higher percentage of people will be affected, their choice will be affected. I know I'm stumbling and I'm not being particularly clear, but I hope I'm getting this point across. Because at the end of the day, Israel is a lose-lose issue for Joe Biden. The people who are passionate about this issue within the Democratic Party are split. And you're not going to marry those two sides in the next few months before the 2024 election. So Joe Biden, his interest is in minimizing the issue of Israel so that people can put their issues aside and vote for him. But the more prominent those issues are, the more they bubble up to the surface, the more you have student movements like this that are shutting down college campuses, the more you have crazy kids going home to their parents and telling them how they hate Israel. Even if those kids don't know why, guess what? They're going to fight about it, and over the summer or something. And the parents are going to become more and more pro-Israel. The kids are going to become more and more anti-Israel, and they're both going to be thinking about that going into the election. Now, that's not necessarily going to be the case if the Republican Party is successful in squashing these protests, in helping Biden by pushing this issue aside and not talking about it, not making Biden and the Democrats talk about it too much, or to, acknowledge the realities of what's happening to people in Gaza. But if these protests persist, if this turns into a long, drawn-out Occupy Wall Street sort of situation, the Democratic Party will be going into the election season bitterly divided, because this is not like a minor issue. This is a very strong wedge issue. It's like abortion. And what ended up happening, the Democratic Party, well, and the Republican Party, they used to be both kind of split on abortion. The Democrats were more pro-choice, the Republicans were more pro-life. But that's a wedge issue. And eventually what happened was the people who had that as their first priority, all of the pro-choice people, they ended up in the Democratic Party, and all of the pro-life people ended up in the Republican Party. The Dems in this particular cycle do not want to force Israel as a wedge issue, because what it will inevitably do is drive the hardcore Zionists in the Democratic Party to vote Republican. And even in the Democratic Party, there are hardcore Zionists whose first priority is funding Israel and making sure, from the U.S. end that the American government is doing everything it can to perpetuate, the Israel project. And if they think that Joe Biden is playing footsie with the anti-Zionist movement, they will be forced at the very least to sit this one out. They don't have to hold their noses and vote for Trump. All they have to do is withhold their vote from Joe Biden. And in states where it's close, they can have an impact. I'll give you a good example. Take a place like Arizona, where the Democratic Party, they're gaining ground in Arizona because of the upper middle class whites who are the John McCain Republicans. Now that John McCain is dead, a lot of these people no longer have any reason to vote for Republican. They have very, what's a good term? Let's say abstract priorities. They're not these practical voters who vote based on, hey, how's the economy doing? Do I feel like I'm doing well? If I feel like I'm doing well, I'm going to vote for the incumbent. If I feel like I'm not doing well, I'm going to vote for the opposition party. These are people who are always doing well enough. And so what they focus on are more esoteric issues, like how does the candidate make me feel? Am I proud to look up to this person? Or would they be a good grandfather? That sort of thing. Well, these sorts of people also tend to be repulsed by anti-Zionists. That's just my experience. Your well-to-do boomers and Gen Xers, not at all sympathetic to Palestinians. And so again, in a close enough election, this could be the kind of thing that would push those voters, just enough of them, out of the Biden camp to allow Trump a marginal victory. So anyway, with that said, I will see you folks back here in the next one.